Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. In this brief presentation, we're going to look at 4 issues related to Flat Earth maps and projections. First of all, we're going to see that the commonly used Azimuthal Equidistant North Pole projection of the Earth and land masses with an ice wall is not a definitive Flat Earth map. And then we'll have a look at how Antarctica could well be at the center of Flat Earth instead. And we'll see from that how it's quite easy to make southern flights work on a flat Earth, such as a flight from Chile to Australia, which doesn't really work if you only use an azimuthal equidistant North Pole projection. And then we'll see how really the globe is nothing more than 2 adjoined azimuth projections. So here we have an azimuthal equidistant projection of the land masses that we are all very familiar with and know to exist on the Earth. And it's centered on what's assumed to be the North Pole. So this does work as a projection for anything that is north of the equator, because it is the same as the projection from the North Pole for the northern hemisphere on the globe. And that's simply because the same center point is used for the projection, and it is the same center point that's used to have the time zones for the Earth, as well as the longitude and latitude lines that are north of the equator. So in that sense, it's fine as a choice of projection. The problem is that it is this particular projection that has been used and widely publicized as the Flat Earth map, but it is not the Flat Earth map. It is just a projection from the same point that is used for the northern hemisphere of the globe projection. And the problem is when using this particular projection is, of course, the distortion that you get of the land masses that are beyond the equator, such as this very elongated Australia, which also puts it very, very far, apparently, from South America. And we can also be led to erroneously believe that we then have an ice wall surrounding all these continents. But this is, again, simply a result of using only one reference point as the center point for this projection and then going from here. And it just distorts everything, and we get the continent of Antarctica distorted to this extent that it then creates this apparent ice wall. So it doesn't mean that an ice wall actually exists. So it is a shame that this has been used and widely become synonymous or symbolic of flat Earth or some kind of perceived flat Earth movement, which of course does then give it this cult-like status and would appear to be easily debunked by those who are a bit more familiar with the way that maps work. So just to emphasize the North Pole projection, here we've got the Gleasons Map, which is another widely used map among flat Earth proponents, and again it works because it does do what it says it does, and that is to represent longitude and time in a way that can be calculated. So basically from this central point, which is the same as is used for the northern hemisphere projection of the globe, then we can point in any particular direction, and we will be pointing in the right direction to look at a particular location that's anywhere south of that northern central point, and we can also tell the time with it. So again, longitude does work with this projection, and the longitude, latitude lines and the time lines or date line, these are all political things. These are all artificial projections that have been put atop maps of the Earth. So it doesn't truly represent what's actually happening on or above the Earth as far as time goes, but of course it is a human construct that works in as far as communication and navigation, because of course it is important to have some kind of centralized timekeeping system or navigation coordinates. But these are all, again, political, based on worldwide trade and centered on the UK with Greenwich Mean Time. Again, this really is nothing more than a way of helping each other communicate across vast distances in different locations, but it does not dictate the physical shape of the Earth in the same way that this projection on the Gleasons map or this projection does not dictate the actual shape of the Earth. It is just a central reference point that means that anything beyond that becomes slightly distorted, as it does with any particular map. So let's just have a look at this, for example, which is the Mercator projection versus the true size of countries. So the light blue represents the Mercator projection that we're all very familiar with from looking at in school or whatever. But of course that has to vastly distort various continents and countries, as we can see here for example Greenland. The light blue represents the Mercator distortion of the real size of Greenland, represented by the dark blue. Whatever kind of projection you wish to use, you are going to encounter distortion of the land masses and the apparent distances between those land masses. So one thing we have to do is to realize that these lines, these longitude, latitude lines and time lines, etc., are imaginary lines that are superimposed. So a projection such as this can help. Again, it doesn't represent the true dimensions or layout of the continents, but at least we have now gotten rid of those lines, and we have, for example, Australia looking more like it usually does. But we still have an issue here with this vast distance between Eastern Australia, for example, and South America, Chile and Argentina. Now, this is a bone of contention when it comes to flight plans. Let's just look at an example here. Here we have a flight between Australia and Chile that is represented and would appear to exist. I think the flight is a single flight that takes about 14 hours. And of course you're crossing vast amounts of ocean here. So people will say this isn't possible on the flat Earth because they are referring to this particular type of projection or this type of projection. So before we look at how that is possible on a flat Earth, let's have a look at this first. Here we have an azimuthal map anywhere projection. This is a really handy little tool to help see how projections actually work. It's on a website called maps.ontarget.cc. I'll put a link in the description for that. So at the moment we have this azimuth projection, and it's equidistant, and we see these lines as we did before, and at the moment it is centered on what's referred to as the North Pole. We can actually we can take off those lines, which is kind of handy, And we can start moving things around, and we'll see that as we move around, then of course we end up with everything else being distorted, that the farther away it is from that central point. So now we've changed this central projection to the South Pole or Antarctica, assuming that Antarctica is a continent. And now we have Australia and South America and South Africa all pointing towards Antarctica as normal. But of course, what is essential to understand here is that wherever you center this projection, and that is entirely up to you, then you will get distortion of everything else that's south of it. We'll just put the lines back on there, and we can kind of see what's happening there. Yeah. Now, of course, it's keeping the points, the north and south poles there, but we can see how the distortion goes about. We can add here this equidistant circle, so we can see from the, I'm going to take off that, so we can see from this, for example, that the distances 4,000 kilometers, 8,000 kilometers, 16,000 kilometers obviously become greater and greater, but this is really excellent to see how we can choose any location as our North Pole or South Pole and project everything from that. So really, the center point of any projection simply represents where you are. So I'm around here in southern Thailand, in Phuket. So of course everything else becomes distorted. Now when I fly to the UK, I would go like this, just kind of across and above India, over all these bits of China or the Middle East, and over to the UK. Yeah. So if I follow that route, then of course everything gets this, so it's a bit difficult to play around with. But I think you'll see the point. Yeah, we can basically choose anywhere we want to be, and that is what any of these other projections are. They are simply a choice of where the center point of the projection is going to be. Now, of course, for the North Pole, it's assumed to be there because we have the assumption that the star Polaris is directly above this location, and that has been used as a reference point for creating the coordinate system. But let's just go back and have a look at this map, for example. Here's an older map. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly when this map was created, but we can see here that in this map we have a North Pole which does have land mass, referred to as Hyperborea, and there are old accounts of people visiting these areas. So whether or not this exists now is unknown, because no one ever goes to the North Pole. It is a point of inaccessibility. It's just assumed to be water at the moment, and we don't really have any flights that ever cross the North Pole. So this is something that simply remains unknown. So it is something that must be investigated. Of course, around the outside here we have all these other land masses represented, which may or may not have existed, may or may not exist currently. Who knows? So let's just have a look then at the way flight plans look on the Earth. You can just go and find this anywhere really, and we can see here that we've got all this hopping about and some very straight lines that go from various locations, but then some others which appear to follow what's often referred to as the Great Circle route. Nothing actually really crosses the North Pole. And what I've done with this one is to change the projection to have it the center point as Antarctica, and we can see from this that the flights are not crossing over. They're not kind of going out here and then coming back in here. They are in fact just hopping from one place to another. So in this sense, could we assume that actually Antarctica does exist as a continent, but it should be where the center of any flat Earth map is projected from, and would appear in that sense to work for the flights that we see going on around the Earth, because we don't have flights crossing an actual North Pole. And what I'm going to show you now is that the southern flight, such as this, can work with this projection. What I did was just take a screenshot of what we were looking at just now, and we can see here that we do in fact get a straight line from Australia to South America, and this line then goes under New Zealand here and above Antarctica here. And so we can see that this, of course, is represented by this arc here is represented by a globe projection. Yeah, but basically we've got the flight going under New Zealand here and above Antarctica here to arrive in Chile. So when we do it with this azimuthal equidistant projection from the South Pole, we can see that we get a straight line. So you see the lines that we will get for flight paths will usually be straight, but when of course we're referring to a projection such as this Mercator projection, which we saw distorts things massively, then you are going to get this apparent curve. Now it may be that a flight will fly in a particular direction because it takes advantage of jet streams, so going east to west is often not the same route as going west to east, because in opposite directions it's easier to follow a longer but quicker route because of the direction of the wind or the jet streams. So we can see though that nothing's actually crossing what might be considered the North Pole. So this kind of works, and this works. So from this Thomas Bradford projection of the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere from the 1830s, I believe, we can see that what we have is this projection from the North Pole and this projection from the South Pole, which together we can create a globe projection. But really you could join these two projections anywhere. Right here they join at South America, but if you imagine them as cogwheels that turn, we could then join Africa here with Africa here. It is nothing more than representing the land masses from these two different points of projection, both of which are a mystery, really. We don't know how much of Antarctica really exists that we're told about. Certain territories have claimed certain pieces of Antarctica, but there remains a huge chunk, allegedly, which is no man's land, which is unclaimed. And as we saw with the North Pole map just now, there could be many more land masses there, and nobody ever crosses over the North Pole in an aircraft or on a boat, because it is what's referred to as a pole of inaccessibility. It is too far beyond the most northern points of those land masses to go and have a point of safe return. So when it comes to flat Earth, it is an ongoing investigation. Exploration needs to be done in all directions to see what is a true representation of this Earth. It could be vastly different to any of the projections and ideas we have been given so far. Thank you very much. Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.